I never told anyone at family gatherings what I actually did for a living. Not because I was ashamed, I just never saw the point. My name is Elena Vargas, I'm 31 years old, and I'm a pediatric cardiac surgeon at Northwestern Memorial in Chicago. I make around $340,000 a year. But if you ask my husband's family, they'd tell you I was a nurse's aide at some small clinic downtown. And that lie? That wasn't mine. That was Daniel's. Daniel and I met 4 years ago at a bookshop on Michigan Avenue. He was sitting on the floor in the history section, reading about the Roman Empire like the world around him didn't exist. I tripped over his shoe on my way to the medical journals, spilled iced coffee on his jacket, and spent the next 10 minutes apologizing while he laughed. He asked me to dinner that same night. We were married 14 months later. Daniel teaches 10th grade history at a public high school on the South Side. He earns about $58,000 a year, works weekends, grading papers, and coaches the debate team for free because he believes in those kids. He is, without exaggeration, the kindest man I have ever known. But his family? His family measures people with a very different ruler. It started on a Tuesday evening. Daniel came home from school looking like he'd swallowed a wasp. He set his bag down by the door, loosened his tie, and stood in the kitchen doorway without saying a word. I was chopping bell peppers for dinner, and I could feel his nervousness from across the room. "My mom's turning 60 this Saturday," he said. "She's doing a dinner, the whole family." I kept chopping. "That sounds nice. What should we bring?" He hesitated. "Victoria's coming." The knife paused mid-cut. Victoria. Daniel's older sister. I had never met her, but I'd heard enough to fill a novel. She was a corporate attorney at a top firm in Manhattan, married to a hedge fund manager named Marcus, and she had a talent for turning every family gathering into a courtroom where she was both the prosecutor and the judge. She had skipped our wedding, sent a card with a check for $200 and a note that read, "Best of luck." "She hasn't been home in 2 years, Daniel continued. "Mom really wants everyone there." "Then we'll go," I said. "I'd like to meet her." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he had when he was about to say something he knew I wouldn't like. "There's one thing, when I told Victoria about you, I may have kept things vague." I set the knife down. "How vague?" "I told her you work at a clinic." "I do work at a clinic. A surgical clinic. Inside one of the top hospitals in the country." "Right," he said carefully. "I just didn't get into the specifics. The specifics being that I'm a surgeon." He exhaled. "Victoria has a way of turning everything into a competition. If she finds out you make 6 times what I do, she'll never let it go. She already thinks I wasted my potential by teaching. I just didn't want the whole weekend to become about numbers." I leaned against the counter and looked at him. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But there was a heaviness in my chest, the kind that comes when someone you love reveals a blind spot you didn't know they had. "So you'd rather she think I'm nobody," I said quietly. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at the floor. "I just wanted it to be easy." I nodded slowly. "Okay." He looked up, surprised. "Okay? If that's the story you told, then that's the story I'll play." I picked up the knife and went back to the peppers. "But Daniel? I'm playing it my way." He didn't ask what I meant. He should have. That Saturday afternoon, I stood in front of our bedroom closet and bypassed everything that looked like me. The tailored blazers. The silk tops. The heels I wore to conferences. Instead, I reached for a pair of old jeans with paint stains on the knee from when we redid the living room. A plain gray crewneck sweater, slightly oversized. White sneakers with scuffed toes. I pulled my hair back into a loose ponytail and put on zero makeup except for a thin layer of lip balm. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked like she might work the front desk at a dentist's office. Friendly. Unremarkable. Invisible. Perfect. Daniel walked in and stopped. "Elena, what are you wearing?" "Clothes," I said, smiling. "You said I work at a clinic. I figured I should dress like someone who makes $15 an hour." I didn't say that. You implied it. I grabbed a canvas tote bag from the back of the closet, the one I used to carry textbooks in medical school. Relax. I'm just dressing the part. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly debating whether to push back. Then he sighed and picked up the car keys. Please just don't make it weird. Me? I pressed my hand to my chest in mock offense. Never. The drive to his mother's house took 40 minutes. Gloria Whitfield lived in a brownstone in Lincoln Park that had been in the family for decades. I had been there many times before, but today it felt different. Today I was arriving as a character, not myself. When we walked through the front door, Gloria greeted us with the warmth she always did. She was a retired schoolteacher with soft gray curls and a laugh that could fill any room. She hugged Daniel, then hugged me even tighter. Elena, honey, you look wonderful, she said. Thank you, Gloria. Happy birthday. Oh, stop, don't remind me about the number, she said, waving her hand. Come in. Victoria and Marcus just got here. We walked into the living room, and there she was. Victoria Whitfield Crane stood by the fireplace with a glass of red wine, looking like she had just stepped off the cover of a legal magazine. Her black dress was immaculate, tailored to perfection. Her hair fell in precise waves, and a gold necklace rested against her collarbone, subtle enough to suggest taste but expensive enough to demand attention. Next to her, Marcus stood in a navy sport coat, his watch catching the light every time he moved his wrist. It was the kind of watch that cost more than most people's cars. Victoria turned and looked at me, her eyes moved from my sneakers to my ponytail in one smooth, appraising sweep. So you're Elena, she said, extending her hand. I've heard about you. All good things, I hope, I said brightly, shaking her hand with a little too much enthusiasm. It's so nice to finally meet you. Daniel talks about you all the time. Does he? She smiled the way people smile when they've already formed an opinion. And what is it you do, Elena? Oh, I work at a clinic, I said, waving my hand vaguely. Nothing exciting. I help out with patients, filing charts, scheduling appointments, that kind of thing. A receptionist, Victoria said. Not a question, a label. I guess you could call it that, I replied with a humble shrug. Victoria turned to Daniel and gave him a look that said everything words didn't need to. Then she took a sip of wine and said, Well, that's nice. Everyone has their role. Exactly, I said. I just like helping people. Of course you do. She turned back to Marcus. Should we open the Barolo? I brought it from that vineyard we visited in Piedmont. And just like that, I had been categorized, filed, and dismissed. In Victoria's mind, I was furniture, background noise. And the evening hadn't even started yet. Dinner was at the long oak table in Gloria's dining room. Gloria had cooked her famous pot roast with roasted vegetables and homemade rolls. It smelled incredible, and for a moment, the warmth of it almost made me forget the game I was playing. Almost. Victoria sat at one end, Marcus beside her, wineglass perpetually in hand. Gloria sat at the head. Daniel and I sat across from Victoria, close enough to catch every micro-expression on her face. The conversation started innocently enough. Gloria talked about her garden, the neighbor's new dog, the book club she'd joined. But, within 10 minutes, Victoria had steered the topic toward herself with the precision of a seasoned litigator. We just closed on a property in the Hamptons, she announced, slicing into her roast. 3 bedrooms, ocean view. Marcus found it through a private listing. It wasn't on the market. Oh wow, I said, eyes wide. The Hamptons. That's the beach place, right? Where all those movies are set? Victoria blinked. It's one of the most exclusive real estate markets in the country. How much was it? I asked innocently. A flicker of a smile crossed her lips. She clearly enjoyed this question. 2.8 million. I let out a small gasp. 2.8 million? For a house you only use in the summer? It's an investment, Victoria said smoothly. Property in the Hamptons only appreciates. I nodded slowly, as if processing a very complicated idea. So you buy a house you don't live in most of the year because later someone else will pay even more for it? That's a simplified way of putting it, yes. Huh, I said, tilting my head. That sounds like when my neighbor buys concert tickets just to resell them online. He calls it flipping. Marcus coughed. Daniel stared at his plate. Victoria's jaw tightened. It's not quite the same thing, she said coolly. Oh, I'm sure it's not, I agreed quickly. Your thing sounds much fancier. Gloria, bless her, changed the subject to the pot roast recipe, but Victoria wasn't done establishing the pecking order. Before the plates were even cleared, she launched into a monologue about their life in Manhattan. We had dinner last month at Le Bernardin. Eric Ripert himself came to our table. Marcus knows the maitre d' from Dartmouth. Le Bernardin, I repeated, pretending to struggle with the pronunciation. Is that French? Like a bistro. Victoria stared at me. It's a 3 Michelin-star restaurant. 3 stars, I echoed, nodding like a student receiving a lesson. Is that a lot? I mean, how many stars can a restaurant get? 3 is the maximum, Victoria said, her patience thinning. It's the highest honor in the culinary world. Oh. So it's like getting an A+? It's nothing like getting an A+. But it's the best you can get, right? So it kind of is. I turned to Daniel. Babe, what's the most stars that Applebee's has? Daniel bit his lip so hard I thought he might draw blood. I don't think Applebee's has Michelin stars, honey. Well, their riblets are pretty good, I said with a shrug. Maybe they should apply. A vein near Victoria's temple pulsed faintly. She took a long sip of wine, regrouped, and shifted to what she clearly considered the crown jewel of her arsenal. I made partner at the firm last year, she said, her voice dropping into the register people use when they want you to understand the gravity of what they're saying. Youngest woman in the firm's history. It was a grueling process, but Marcus and I agreed that sacrifices were necessary. Partner, I said, leaning forward. That's like being the boss? It's like being one of the owners, Victoria corrected. I now have equity in one of the most prestigious firms in New York. That's amazing, I said. You must work really hard. I bill over 2,800 hours a year, she said. That means late nights, weekends, holidays, you do what it takes. 2,800 hours, I murmured. That's a lot of hours not being at home. The comment landed softly, but it landed. Victoria's smile froze for just a fraction of a second. Success requires commitment, she said. Oh, totally, I agreed. I just meant, when do you, hang out, do stuff for fun? We travel, she said, gesturing to Marcus. Aspen in winter, Street Barts in spring. The Hamptons in summer. Do you ever just stay home and watch a movie? Make popcorn? That kind of thing? Victoria looked at me as if I had asked whether she ate food off the floor. We prefer experiences that enrich us. Right, I said softly. But do you enjoy them? Or do you just collect them? The table went quiet. Gloria paused with a roll halfway to her mouth. Marcus suddenly found his plate very interesting. Daniel pressed his foot against mine under the table. Victoria straightened. Of course I enjoy them. Why wouldn't I? I don't know, I said with a gentle smile. I'm just asking. She narrowed her eyes, sensing for the first time that the conversation had shifted beneath her. But before she could respond, Gloria stood and said, Who wants coffee? I made that hazelnut blend you love, Victoria. The tension cracked, people exhaled, plates were collected, and as Gloria disappeared into the kitchen, I offered to help. What happened next wasn't part of any plan. It was just life reminding everyone in the room what actually mattered. I was carrying a stack of dessert plates toward the kitchen when I heard a sharp, strangled sound behind me. I turned. Marcus was standing near the table, his face red, his hands clawing at his throat. His mouth was open, but no air was moving. His eyes bulged with panic. Victoria screamed. Marcus! Marcus! Gloria rushed back from the kitchen. Daniel shot up from his chair. Everyone was shouting, panicking, frozen in that horrible gap between fear and action. I set the plates down and crossed the room in 3 steps. My voice came out calm and clear, the same voice I used in the operating room when things went wrong and panic was not an option. He's choking. Everyone step back. I moved behind Marcus, positioned my fist just above his navel, wrapped my other hand around it, and delivered a firm upward thrust. Nothing. I did it again, harder. On the third thrust, a chunk of bread dislodged from his airway and shot across the table. Marcus doubled over, gasping, coughing, sucking in ragged breaths. Color flooded back into his face. I steadied him by the shoulders. You're okay, breathe. Slow breaths, in through the nose. He nodded, trembling, eyes watering. Gloria had her hand over her mouth. Daniel stood frozen, staring at me. And Victoria, for the first time all evening, was completely silent. I guided Marcus to a chair and checked his pulse. Your breathing sounds clear, the obstruction's gone. But I'd recommend getting checked out if you feel any soreness in your throat or chest. Victoria's voice came out small. How did you know how to do that? I looked at her. And for a moment, I considered keeping the mask on. But looking at Marcus still catching his breath, and Gloria with tears in her eyes, and Daniel standing there with a look on his face that sat somewhere between pride and guilt, I decided the game was over. Because I'm a surgeon, I said. A pediatric cardiac surgeon at Northwestern Memorial. The silence that followed was unlike any silence I had ever experienced. It wasn't the silence of awe or admiration, it was the silence of a house of cards collapsing, one by one, quietly, in slow motion. Victoria stared at me. What? I operate on children's hearts, I said. I've been doing it for 5 years. Before that, I spent 4 years in residency and 4 years in medical school. I make $340,000 a year. And I drive a 10-year-old Honda Civic because I'd rather put money toward my student loans and a fund for underserved kids who need surgeries their families can't afford. Victoria turned to Daniel, her voice was barely a whisper. You told me she was a receptionist. I told you she worked at a clinic, Daniel said quietly. I never said receptionist, you assumed. Victoria's mouth opened and closed. The courtroom composure was gone. In its place was something I hadn't expected to see. Confusion. Not anger, not humiliation. Just genuine confusion, as if the filing system she used to organize the world had just been scrambled. I sat down across from her. My voice was soft, not cruel. I hadn't done this to hurt her. Victoria, I didn't pretend tonight to embarrass you. I did it because I wanted to see how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you. She didn't respond. You sat at this table for 2 hours, I continued, and you told me the price of your house, the cost of your dinners, the hours you bill, the names of restaurants and designers and vacation destinations. But you didn't ask your mother a single question about her life. You didn't ask Daniel how his students are doing. You didn't ask me anything real, not because you're a bad person, but because you've gotten so used to measuring people by what they have that you've forgotten to see who they are. Victoria's eyes glistened. She looked down at her hands. My $50 canvas tote? I said gently. I've carried it since medical school. It was with me during every 36-hour shift. Every time I lost a patient and sat alone in a hallway trying not to cry. Every time I saved one and felt like the luckiest person alive. That bag isn't worth anything to anyone else. But to me, it's priceless. And no Birkin or Hamptons house or Michelin-star dinner could replace what it means to me. Gloria reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her eyes were wet. I like this one, she whispered to Daniel. I've always liked this one. Daniel let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for years. He looked at me with something raw and open in his eyes. Victoria sat very still for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had none of its earlier polish. It was small and uncertain, like a woman hearing her own echo for the first time and not recognizing the sound. I didn't realize, she said quietly. I didn't realize I was doing that. Most people don't, I said. That's the point. She looked up at me, and for the first time, she actually saw me. Not the sneakers. Not the ponytail, not the canvas tote, Just me. I'm sorry, she said. And something in her voice told me she meant it. The drive home was quiet, but not heavy. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something honest has been said and there's nothing left to add. Daniel drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on mine. About halfway home, he said, I should have told her the truth from the start. Yes, you should have. I wasn't ashamed of you. I need you to know that. I do know that, I said, but hiding who I am to make your sister comfortable told me something about what you were willing to sacrifice for peace, and I can't be one of those sacrifices, Daniel, not ever. He nodded slowly. You won't be, I promise. I don't need you to brag about me, I said, watching the city lights blur past. I don't need anyone at that table to know my salary or my title, but I need you to never be afraid of the truth. Not about me. Not about us. He squeezed my hand. I hear you. 2 weeks later, something arrived in the mail. A small package with a Manhattan return address. I opened it at the kitchen table while Daniel watched. Inside was a handwritten note on plain stationery. No monogram, no embossed letterhead, just simple paper. It read, Elena, I've been thinking about what you said. About measuring people by what they have instead of who they are. I've been doing it for so long I didn't even notice. I called Mom last week. Not to tell her about the Hamptons house or the firm. Just to talk. She told me about her garden. About a cardinal that visits every morning. We talked for an hour. I don't remember the last time I did that. Thank you. For the mirror. I needed it. Victoria. I read it twice. Then I set it on the table and looked at Daniel. She's going to be okay, I said. He smiled. You think so? Yeah. I think so. That Sunday, I went to the farmer's market near our apartment. I wore my old jeans, my med school tote over my shoulder, and no makeup except sunscreen. No one there knew I was a surgeon. No one cared. The woman selling peaches called me sweetheart and threw in an extra one for free. A little girl at the flower stand asked me to help her pick the prettiest sunflower. I chose the one with a bent stem and a slightly crooked face, and I told her it was the prettiest because it was different from all the others. She grinned and said, That's what my mom says about me. And right there, holding a bag of peaches and a crooked sunflower, I felt richer than anyone I knew. Because here's what I've learned. Money is a tool. Status is a costume. Titles open doors, but they don't keep people in the room. What keeps people in the room is how you make them feel. Whether you ask about their garden, whether you remember their name, whether you kneel down and help a kid pick a sunflower on a Sunday morning. Victoria had spent years decorating her life with expensive things, and none of them had made her happy. I know this because happy people don't need you to know the price of their handbag. They don't need you to feel small so they can feel tall. They just live, fully and freely, and let others do the same. I don't know if Victoria will change completely. Old habits are stubborn things. But she called her mother, and she wrote that note, and she used the word thank you without attaching a dollar sign to it. That's a start. As for Daniel, he posted a photo of us the next morning. It was from a barbecue at a friend's house, me laughing with sauce on my chin, him looking at me like I hung the moon. The caption said, My wife saves children's lives for a living. And she still trips over my shoes. I'm the luckiest man alive. It wasn't about the title. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen for exactly who I am and never being asked to be less. And that, honestly, is worth more than anything money could ever buy.